This is the grand finale of Slappy's Nightmare, the final chapters. Now let's pick up where we left off last time, for the last time. This is Slappy's Nightmare. Chapter 30. Pain shot through Slappy's head. Again. The bright white kitchen ceiling lights flashed in his eyes. As Wally battered Slappy's head against the floor, the light began to fade. The frightened shouts and screams from all around the kitchen brought Slappy back. He opened his eyes and saw the cooks and kitchen help huddled against the refrigerators in back. The door to the kitchen was jammed with curious kids. "Die, Slappy!" Wally shrieked. He shoved Slappy's head down again, but Slappy reached up, both wooden hands, and plunged them hard into the other dummy's midsection. Slappy rolled out from under Wally, jumped unsteadily to his feet. His eyes swept over the kitchen, all a blur. The frightened kitchen staff in their aprons, the screaming, startled kids, the dark steel ranges with their big, steaming pots of food. With a growl, Wally dove at Slappy, grabbing for his head again. Slappy dodged away. He lurched into an oven door and bounced off. Wally spun around and prepared to come at him again. With a groan, Slappy hoisted a huge, bubbling stew pot off the range and heaved it at the other dummy. "Aye!" Wally uttered a scream of agony as a heavy wave of boiling pea soup splashed over him. His arms and legs twitched and flailed. He sputtered as the thick soup oozed down over his head, burning him, scalding him. Still groaning in pain, he staggered toward Slappy. Slappy grabbed a long food tray off the stovetop. Macaroni and cheese bubbled up over the sides as Wally stumbled across the room, wiping thick green soup from his face. From his eyes, Slappy dumped the macaroni over Wally's head. Wally cried out again, made a desperate grab for Slappy. Kids screamed. A few teachers pushed past the crowd at the doorway, eyes wide with confusion and surprise. Wally's shoes slid in a big puddle of pea soup and macaroni. He fell face down onto the floor. Slappy moved to pin him down, but to his surprise, Georgia stepped in front of him. Eyes wild, her face bright red. She pressed her hands against her waist and moved to block his path. "Now what?" Slappy thought. "Am I going to have to destroy her too?" Chapter 31. "Slappy!" Georgia cried. "Stella didn't lie. You are alive. What is happening? Explain it to me." He uttered a low growl and struggled to get around her. He knew he had to destroy Wally, or he would die. "Slappy!" she repeated. "Out of my way, idiot!" he screeched. Georgia gasped. You talk!" Slappy reached for Wally. Georgia stepped in front of him. With a frustrated cry, he grabbed her around the waist and shoved her across the room. Georgia stumbled back. Slappy lifted a metal vat of spaghetti and pushed it in her face. Screaming and sputtering, she scraped at her face with both hands, shaking burning hot tomato sauce from her hair, pulling globs of steaming noodles from the top of her head. Slappy leaped at Wally. The two of them toppled to the floor. They wrestled in the slop of pea soup, macaroni, and spaghetti sauce, rolling over each other, flailing and punching wildly, biting at each other with snapping jaws. "Stop them! Somebody stop them! Do something! Someone! Call the police!" Screams rang out through the kitchen. Slappy jammed his fist hard into Wally's open mouth. Wally clamped his jaws shut on Slappy's hand, and then, to Slappy's shock, he felt himself being lifted off the floor. Wally rose up in front of him. It took Slappy a few seconds to realize that someone had grabbed him up by his jacket collar. He turned and saw Georgia. Spaghetti sauce ran down her hair and face onto her sweater. She was panting hard, her eyes narrowed in anger. No more, she murmured. Slappy squirmed, struggling to free himself, but Georgia kept her grip on his jacket. She had Wally in her other hand. Slappy saw. The two of them kicked and twisted. Let go, you fool, Slappy ordered her. Let go now so I can finish him. No more, Georgia murmured again. She raised the thrashing, kicking dummies high and heaved them toward the open door of some machine against the wall. The kitchen passed by Slappy in a blur as he hurtled across the room. He gasped as he recognized the machine Georgia had tossed him into. The open machine. The huge garbage compactor. He recognized it, but he didn't have time to scream. He plunged through the open door. Wally jammed close beside him. Before the pain shot through him, Slappy heard the grinding sound. Low at first, just a rumble. Then a deafening roar. The pain started at his feet, roared quickly up his legs, his body. Wally and Slappy both uttered cries of agony, their last cries, as the garbage compactor roared and chewed them to tiny chunks of sawdust and cloth, chewed them to darkness. Chapter 32. With a shrill scream, Slappy blinked open his eyes. He sat up with a jerk. His body trembled. His wooden jaws chattered. He blinked several more times as the harsh light invaded his eyes. I'm dead, he thought. Is this what it's like? The room came into focus. A familiar room. He recognized the chair, the dressing table with its dust-smeared mirror, the metal chest resting open against the cracked plaster wall. The dressing room? Slappy's mouth dropped open. Am I back in the theater dressing room? Jimmy O. James shimmered into view, leaning over him. Slappy? Slappy stared up at him, speechless for once. Slappy, are you okay? Jimmy asked. What's wrong with you? Why were you twitching like that? You kept crying out in your sleep. Slappy blinked again. I guess I was having a nightmare. Jimmy snickered. A dummy having a nightmare, he muttered. That's a good one. He frowned down at Slappy. Knowing your evil mind, it must have been a nasty nightmare. It was, Slappy stammered. It was my worst nightmare. I dreamed I had to do 3 good deeds. Jimmy shook his head. You must have been horrified. Listen, you and I have to talk. But Slappy didn't hear him. The dummy had jumped to his feet and was doing a joyful dance across the dressing room floor. I'm alive, he cried. I'm alive. He danced and twirled and clapped his hands gleefully above his head. All a dream! Woo-wee! I'm alive! Slappy lives! Slappy lives! Slappy, Jimmy stepped in front of him to stop the dance. Did you hear me? You and I have to talk. Slappy dropped onto the edge of a trunk and tilted his head up at Jimmy. What about, creep face? I can't perform with you anymore, the ventriloquist said, crossing his arms in front of his chest. I can't let you hurt any more kids. You are too evil. You cannot perform again. Slappy tossed back his head in a cruel laugh. What choice do you have, Jimmy boy? I'm all you've got. No, you're finished. You are history, Slappy, Jimmy insisted. The dummy jumped to his feet. You know what? I'm not taking any more lip from you. I'm gonna run the show from now on. I'm putting you out to pasture. You've outlived your usefulness. I'm the act, not you. Slappy was interrupted by a loud knock on the dressing room door. A man in a brown uniform dragged in a large pine wood crate. Delivery for you, Mr. O. James. Jimmy thanked him and bent down to open the crate. Slappy laughed. How wonderful! Just the right size for your coffin, Jimmy. What good timing. Jimmy O. James ignored him. I wonder who sent me this, he muttered. He pried open the lid. Whoa. The inside of the crate was lined with purple velvet. Stretched out on the bottom was a ventriloquist dummy. It's your identical twin, Jimmy declared, scratching his head in amazement. Do you believe it? Slappy didn't reply. Jimmy reached down by the dummy's feet and pulled out a stack of yellowed papers. He examined them quickly. When he turned to Slappy, he had a wide grin on his face. Guess what, Slappy? Sometimes nightmares come true. Jimmy lowered his eyes to the page and quickly began to read the curse. And that is the end of Slappy's nightmare. This was Slappy's nightmare. And it's over now. There's no more pages left to read. I can look again. Yeah, there's no more story here. Unless you want a sneak peek of Earth Geeks Must Go. But we'll save that for another time. Dang, it's all over now. This sucks.